I am going to do a review on, or commentary on somebody who I really, really like, the Bible Answer Man. His name is Hank Hanegraaff. Listened to him for years and years. Way back when I had a regular job, he had a radio show on. The Christian Research Institute had a show called the Bible Answer Man. Hank Hanegraaff would take phone calls and he would answer people's religious questions. I had a job where I sat at a desk and I was a repairman. This is going to be fun, especially for my haters, because my repair job was doing what else? Fixing broken hair dryers. I know. It's just too perfect for me. I'm not kidding you. I'm totally serious. So I would listen to him, but this was back in the days when the only headphones that you had were the big ones. This was those little white ones that go in your ear. Maybe that's why I'm always doing this with my ear, because I spend so many hours every day with that thing stuffed in my ear. Oh, it drives me nuts. But either way, I love Bible Answer Man because he would answer so many questions that I never even thought of, but people from around the world called him. So it was really wonderful. Him, another guy like that who doesn't know, he's got a radio show program called The Narrow Path. Steve Gregg, Bible Answer Man, Hank Hanegraaff, and Steve Gregg. Great resources if you ever want to learn about Christians, for the people listening. But I know the people listening aren't majority Christian. They're atheists and they're activists, animal activists. Thank you for listening. So I'm going to use this opportunity just to teach you how to reply to some of the things that Hank said. Now, Hank, it's funny because I'm sure I'm going to use the stuff he taught me against him, but let's just roll with it. So let me switch to, is it this screen here? Oh yeah, there we go.
Back to the phone lines. We'll talk next to Renee, listening in Kansas City, Missouri.
I don't know Renee. What side this is on.
Hello, Hank. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
For me, I see it right here.
Yes, you're welcome. My question is, I had been a vegan for, I don't know, maybe 3 years.
I think she said 3, but it almost sounds like 30.
Recently, kind of gone back to eating meat for health reasons, but...
Okay, activists. When they say they go back to eating meat we haven't got to the Bible stuff yet. When they go back to eating meat for health reasons, I asked them, what was the nutrient that you couldn't get from plants that you had to start eating meat again? They won't know because there isn't anything. Every nutritional thing you need, you can get from plants. I mean, that's where cows get it. That's where chickens get it. That's where pigs get it. So, that's always a great one.
I had come across so mmany people that would ask me questions.
Oh, one other thing is, since God's original plan in Genesis, and I always recommend my activist friends, please, if you can, even if you hate God and you hate the Bible, please take the time to get familiar with Genesis chapter 1, because there's so much vegan information in there that you can use when you're talking to people like me who do believe in God. So again, you don't got to believe it, but if you know it, you're going to go into battle much better prepared. But in Genesis 1:29, God says plants will be your food. And then in 1:30, he doubles down on it and says plants will be food for the animals. So obviously, God says plants are all that you need for food. What doctor told you need meat? Have him bring it up to God. See, that's a good way you can use the whole God thing. All right, back to the show.
As far as, why I didn't eat meat. And, I would go into a debate sometimes with people as far as...
Debate? You mean people would debate whether or not you could eat food items made from animal abuse? And you're a Christian? Of course you can abuse and torture animals. No. Of course you're going to get a debate from people like me. That's what I do.
That defend themselves from eating meat as far as using the Bible, Genesis, how God created, the herbs and plants and things for...
See? Genesis 1:29. She knows it.
Us to eat and not so much animals. I just wanted to know what you thought about, eating meat, basically.
Well, there's no prohibition in the Bible against eating meat. In fact, we shouldn't call unclean.
Okay, no prohibition against eating meat. Where do I begin on prohibitions against eating meat? Okay, there's a bunch of them. I don't know why he would say that unless he's thinking that the prohibitions that did exist were in the Old Testament under the Mosaic law. Remember, Christians We believe that there's the Old Testament Mosaic law that applies to the Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jews. And then there's the New Testament that when Jesus died, we now are saved through grace. We don't have to follow those 613 laws that the Old Testament Jews did. So he might be doing that. So I'm going to try and give you a few verses that would argue that, because I think he's right, but at the same time he could also be considered wrong. So I'm going to kind of go over things because I like rattling it up with the Christians I talk to. Eating blood is a prohibition that's in the Old Testament in a few places. It's in Genesis, in Leviticus. I think it's in Deuteronomy. And I know it's also for sure in Acts. And the reason I'm mentioning Acts is because we got Genesis and Leviticus and where prohibitions, we got meat eating prohibitions. But Acts is after Jesus died. Acts chapter 15 is 3 to 5 years after Jesus died. No, maybe more. I'm trying to remember at what point. Not important. I'm going to tell you this. It's at least 3 years after Jesus died. And there were still prohibitions against eating blood that the disciples kept. Okay, so that's a good point to take in. The next one would be eating dead animals that were already dead. I say that because when people did get permission to eat animals from God, and it was God saying, yes, I want you to. It was God saying, if you're going to do it, this is how you do it. You had to bring the animal to the temple to be slaughtered by a priest who did it a certain way, or else the animal was considered unclean. It was prohibited. So we're dealing with Exodus, Leviticus, where they couldn't eat animals that were already dead from some other source. It had to be killed there. And it also, you couldn't eat wild animals. Like, let's say a tiger. Were there tigers in Jerusalem? No. Some animal tore up another animal. You couldn't eat the pieces of meat that were still on the dead carcass. Now, if you think about that prohibition, that applies to all the meat we eat today. When I say we, I just mean people in general, not me, but I lump myself in there because when I'm talking, I try to use that word we because I don't want the Christians I'm talking to forget that I'm like them. I'm a Christian too. I just happen to look at this through a vegan filter. So where was I? Oh yeah. So any meat that you get in the grocery store, in your drive-thru, in a restaurant, these animals were all killed way earlier. Days before, weeks before, maybe even months before. So that prohibition was sent to. Then there's the prohibition against eating unclean animals. Yeah, that's definitely Old Testament stuff, but there's a lot of comments about that in the New Testament. But we're thinking, again, most of these laws are going to be in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Mishandling sacrificed meat would be another prohibition. The mishandling would be that you're not doing it with the right kind of reverence. It's like, think about this. When the Jews were told they could kill an animal, now they didn't have the high-tech machinery we have today. So to them, the most painless way was to have a knife that's so sharp, it couldn't even have a little tiny nick in it. Like if you look at the cover of my book, you know, the Vegans versus the Verses book, there's a knife on the cover. It's got a little nick in it. So that's like an Easter egg to us religious fanatics who look at it and go, oh, that knife, you can't use that to kill an animal. Well, the reason for that nick is if it caused any unnecessary pain, you couldn't eat the animal. That made it unkosher. Any unnecessary pain. And right now, when you go to a factory farm, it's nonstop unnecessary pain. So none of those animals would be permissible. They're prohibited. Let me get some more New Testament stuff. I think to meat sacrificed to idols. Now, there's a lot of yes and no's in there in the New Testament, but I'm thinking in Acts chapter 15 and in 1 Corinthians, they're talking about meat sacrificed to idol, that those are prohibited. Then, of course, the one that gets me in a lot of trouble would be in Proverbs. And I get it because I'm a skinny guy. So as soon as I bring it up, I get accused of fat shaming, but the Bible isn't politically correct. It doesn't care. It links eating meat with gluttony. So that's a prohibition. So, yeah, it shows a moral failing there. But so, yeah, I don't know why Hank would say there's no prohibitions against eating meat. Maybe he meant something else. There's a good chance he did. Also, there's a chance he didn't. Let's go back to the program.
Well, I mean, there's no prohibition in the Bible against eating meat. In fact, we shouldn't call unclean what God has called clean.
Okay, hold on, Hank. Were you to say we shouldn't call unclean, what God has called clean. That's in Acts chapter 10. I'm going to pull up the verse here because I want to be able to read it. What God has cleaned, no longer call unholy. What God has made clean, do not call common. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. I'm reading different, translations of that same verse. What God has made clean, you must not call uncommon. What God has cleansed, that call not thou common. Common and unclean would be pretty much the same thing. See, Jews had to eat kosher food. The non-Jews, the Gentiles, could eat whatever they wanted. So what that comes down to is for Hank Hanegraaff to use that in defense of eating meat it's totally out of the context of what Acts chapter 10 is. What we're dealing with is Peter's, one of the disciples, one of the big ones, one of the top guys, head honchos, kind of like considered the leader. And he was going to go visit a guy named Cornelius. He gets a vision. He goes on a rooftop because he's traveling. He gets tired. He gets a vision. Cornelius, by the way, was a Gentile. He's a non-Jew. Jews and Gentiles, they couldn't party together. All right. They had to be separate. It was an unclean versus clean thing. See where we're getting with this? So he falls asleep, goes into a trance. God lowers a sheep from heaven with all these kinds of animals on there. And he says, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter's like, no, I never eat anything unclean. Do you see how this just keeps going on, the prohibitions and stuff that do exist or did exist at that time? And God says again, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter's like, no, I don't eat unclean food. And God's like, kill and eat. I mean, that's kind of creepy. Kill, kill, kill. But Peter, let's step back one other thing. Remember what I said about Jesus? Let me just say, Jesus, I don't know left or right, the way this mirror works, but Jesus died here. Years after, Peter is still keeping kosher. He's like, I've never done it. Even though, so for people that say, once Jesus died, all foods are, no, they're still keeping kosher. But they don't get it. So what God is doing is using this vision to make Peter understand that you can go party with Cornelius. You can do all these things. Everything is now clean. There is no Jew. There is no Gentile. There is no Greek. There is no barbarian. There is no more slave. We're all equal in God's eyes. As a matter of fact, if you read all of Acts chapter 10 and go down to the last few verses, you hear Peter describing his vision, saying, I now understand what it means. It means that we're all equal in God's eyes. Has nothing whatsoever to do with eating meat. So for Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man, to use that verse out of its context when talking to this lady, I got a problem with it. And I just told you my problem with it. Back to the program.
Made very plain that it isn't what goes into a man's mouth and out through his body that defiles him. It's that which proceeds from the heart. Now,
okay. He's doing the same thing he just did in the previous verse from Acts with Peter. He's talking about what goes into a man's mouth does not defile him. Totally agree. But that had nothing to do with meat. That's in Mark and in the book of Mark and the Matthew. Let me look up one of those. Give me a second here. Okay, I'm going to look here at Matthew in Matthew chapter 15. The Pharisees come up to Jesus and say, hey, why don't your disciples follow the traditions of the elders in the church, the old time dudes? They don't do the ceremonial washing of their hands when they eat bread, according to the King James Version. When they eat bread, there's no meat in this. They're not talking about meat whatsoever anywhere in Matthew chapter 15 or Mark chapter 7 when the Pharisees are confronting Jesus about this. Why Mr. Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man, is using it in defense of eating meat, I think he's taking advantage of the fact that the callers that call in, they don't know all this stuff. All right, they didn't look into Matthew chapter 15 in the first few verses. They didn't look into Mark chapter 7 in the first few verses. That's kind of disingenuous, wouldn't you say there, Mr. Hanegraaff? So where am I at with that? So they're talking about why do you, and Jesus shoots back and goes, why are you guys eating without keeping in the traditions of God? It's like they're putting the traditions of men more important than God. They're doing all the right things. They're doing all these good traditions. They're washing their hands the 4 times, I think it is, the ritual, and they're praying the right prayers. They're doing the right holidays. They're tithing. They're doing all the stuff they're supposed to do. And then they're eating with those hands. But it's what comes out of their hearts. It's their judgmental ways of life. It's their evil, all the things that come out of them that defile them. The disciples, they got dirty hands. They're not ceremonial clean, but they're eating, but it's not what goes into them. That just gets pooped out, it says, which is kind of a fun verse. Like it's not what they're eating that defiles them. It's what comes out of them. So this passage has nothing to do with meat. Bread was the food that was talked about. It has everything to do with eating with ceremonially unclean hands, not dirt under your fingernails kind of dirt, but ceremonially unclean hands, and not following the traditions. So he took that way out of context. If you're an activist, don't let anybody do that to you. He's taking advantage of this caller, and the Christians you talk to, if they use this verse to defend their meat eating, they're taking advantage of you because you don't know. But now you know. Back to the caller.
I think that you've put your finger on the operative question. What is going to be most healthy for you? I think this is a very, very important question because...
Okay, it's important to you, Mr. Hanegraaff, because it allows you to avoid what veganism is. Veganism is not a diet. You are lowering it to nothing more than a diet. Veganism is a choice not to hurt animals, not to exploit them in any way. It isn't just diet. It's about the clothes we wear. We don't wear leather. We don't wear silk. We don't wear wool. We don't do anything that causes animals. I mean, if we're living on a desert island, I know I bring this up before and Christians always do it, so that's why I bring it up. Just agree with them. Say, look, if I'm living on a desert island or on the shores of Galilee with Jesus and his buddies, and there's nothing to eat but a fish, eat the fish. You won't be having this argument. But none of us watching this on a computer right now are living in that kind of situation. Let's deal with the 21st century. 2025 is what it is right now. And you know what? We've got responsibilities because of all the wonderful technology we have to get food from around the world. We can't give in to our gluttonous lust for animal flesh, not when we have other options. So I don't think that's fair that he did that. I wish he didn't do that. This breaks my heart when I go over these guys, because I look up to them for education. Makes me check and double check everything they say. All right. Back.
We're called to be stewards of the temple of the Holy Spirit, our body. And this is one of the reasons that we employ living.
Okay, I agree with that. We are stewards of this body that we gave us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19 and 20. I got to make sure I remember that. I'm starting to remember that, but I keep forgetting the thing. What it's saying is our body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. God, the Holy Spirit. If you're a Trinitarian, Christians are Trinitarians, they believe the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and God, the Father, all one, three separate, all one. They live within us. People should see that in our bodies, in our lives. But if God lives in us, we should see God in the world. Let's use one of these animal products that Christians commonly eat. Let's use milk. The way we get milk products today, I'm going to go through it step by step, because I'm sure Christians are listening, not just the animal rights activists. So for you guys, the activists, you know this. Christians, when you get milk, cows don't produce milk because God made them produce milk 24/7 every day of their lives for their 20 plus year lifespan. No, they produce milk for the same reason women produce milk, because they have babies or they're pregnant. They're getting ready to have a baby. They just had a baby. Step one, how does that cow get pregnant? Well, you need a bull to do that. So what do Christians do? Christian factory farm Christians, they will take a bull, restrain it, take an electric steel dildo, shove it up the bull, okay? And then they will, manipulate the bull's penis. Yeah, right, that to collect sperm, because that electric dildo gives them an erection. Okay, they'll collect that. Then they'll take a cow and lock it up into a metal framework, because they don't wait for cows and bulls to do this naturally the way God planned it. No, they've got a plan that's much better than God's plan. These factory farmers, oh yes, they do. They will then take that handful of bull sperm and shove it up the cow's butthole vagina and then get the cow pregnant. When the cow produces the baby, they take the baby, shove it off into a veal crate because, well, we don't want the baby to drink that milk. No, humans want that milk. So the baby ends up getting killed or sent off to the veal or ends up becoming dog food or something. And then the cow goes through this again and again and again because it only produces milk just after it's pregnant. And once the milk starts to die down, they impregnate it again. Same process with the bull, same process with the raping of the cow. Doesn't end. Yeah, and you may not consider it rape. I'm sure the cow does, though. So let's just say the sexual molestation then, okay, if you don't want to hear rape. So this goes on. And remember how God can program the cow to live over 20 years? Its body is spent after this happening 4 or 5 times. So it can barely even walk at this point. So they just kill it. Is this what a person with the Holy Spirit living in their temple should do? No, they don't. If Christ is living in you, there's no way you would involve yourself in that kind of behavior. Let's go on and see what else he says.
Disciplines in our life, it is because those bodily disciplines allow us to serve the Lord in a much more efficacious fashion. So,
yeah, my discipline is I'm going to serve the Lord by not eating products made from animal abuse and the sexual molestation of innocent animals. No, I got that discipline. You know, I'm not a 4-year-old that wants ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No, I'm a grown child of God who has the ability, the free will given to me by God to choose not to eat products made from animal abuse. Why isn't that a essential part of the Christian faith?
I think what we eat is very important, but there's no prohibition. We need to eat those things that fit well with our metabolism, with the kinds of people that we are.
Okay, maybe he's under the assumption that eating vegan is bad. I don't think he's trying to mislead. I think he's a victim, just like many people are. They're under the assumption that we have to eat animal products to survive that fits well with our metabolism. No, we don't. So I just pulled up a list here because there's just way too many for me to memorize. But let me just go through some of these that I looked online. Well, first off, let's talk about veganism. Veganism is healthy. It's extremely healthy. You know, a meat-eating diet or a vegan diet can be bad if you don't plan it properly. That's why so many people are sick. But if you plan it properly, a vegan diet isn't going to hurt you. So let's look at the major health organizations that agree that vegan diets are healthy. The American Diabetes Association, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the British Dietetic Association, the Dietitians of Canada, the World Health Organization, United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, the National Health Services of the UK, the Harvard School of Public Health. All these organizations, we're talking tens of thousands of doctors, nurses, medical practitioners, scientists, who all agree that veganism is healthy. And if you think about it, those thousands and thousands of people, they're not vegans trying to promote a vegan lifestyle. They are just people reporting that, yes, this is healthy. 98% of them are probably meat eaters, like 98% of the world is meat eaters. So they're not vegans pushing a vegan agenda, propaganda. They're just reporting. Our studies show that 70% of all hospital visits would be gone if people went vegan. And then if you even fix the rest of your lifestyle, you exercise regularly, no alcohol, no cigarettes. And you know what? Eat junk food. If you want to eat vegan junk food, do it. Once a week ain't going to kill you. So enough of that. Let me get back to what else he had to say on that.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Hank.
That music just brings back memories to me. So that's my review of that phone call. I got a few more coming up from the Bible Answer Man. I do enjoy him. Hank Hanegraaff upsets me because I did put so much trust into him growing up. But Steve Gregg from The Narrow Path, That's a guy that I'm just like, wow, I thought him and I were on the same page. But he joked about it. He's one of these Bible answering guys. And when his joke was, if God didn't want us to eat animals, why did he make them from meat? And I'm just like, that just broke my heart, because somebody that I looked up to. But hey, that's my fault. Bad on me for putting anybody on a pedestal. I should only put Jesus Christ on the pedestal. And there's no way Jesus would say, yeah, let's kill and torture animals. Not in today's world when we have choices. All right, so remember, if you have a choice of food that comes from animal abuse or food that comes from compassion, what should a Christian choose? Compassion, of course, because your body's a temple of the Holy Spirit. I'm done with this one. I'm going to go down and have something to eat.